Vince, what about you talk to us about, we'll just forget about this self-managed super fund thing for a second.
Yep. Because that does change the complexion.
Yeah. Let's talk about run-of-the-mill big super fund that you see on the TV or that a lot of Australians have. So just a industry fund, a retail like your AMPs or your MLCs or your BTs.
So a super fund is really a bundle of three different services. You've got the trustee services, and trustee in that sense means someone who owes you an obligation to look after your best interests and prefer your interest to theirs. And there are 165 of those, give or take, and they hold a licence from APRA to run a super fund. And they're the people who's responsible for putting out the PDS, holding the money, getting the accounts done, and they're the ones who'll get smacked over the head by APRA if anything does go wrong. They then need to put together a portfolio. So portfolio management is the next set of services.
Yeah, so we've got the trustee, then we've got the actual, would you say, investing?
Yep. So the portfolio management, which is deciding what it's going to be invested in.
Yep.
And that is the thing that says, look, I'm going to create a balanced option. It's going to have 20% in infrastructure, 20% in real estate, 40% in Australian shares, et cetera, et cetera. And they're then going to engage with external fund managers to actually put that money in place. So most of the big funds that you'll be familiar with don't actually manage very much money. So House Plus, for example, doesn't manage a cent of money in-house. It's all managed by external managers. And that's the third piece, the actual asset management. So trustee, portfolio manager, asset manager. Some funds like PSSAP is
The government?
the old public sector super is statutorily barred from managing money. So the law that set it up says you are not allowed to manage money in-house. So
You've just got to make the decisions.
Which
and
manager
be a
to
good
buy.
Trustee.
That's right.
And I think it's a really good an important point to make here, Vince, that in this trustee relationship, Vince Scully or insert Mary or Joe, whoever
as
out
the
there,
member.
as the member,
Yep.
you technically, if you want to, like, that super fund money isn't really yours, quote unquote, in terms of an estate asset.
Correct.
It's held in an external third-party corner of the world, which has a trustee, which is insert your big name super fund,
Yep.
for the benefit of Vince Scully, Mary, or Joe.
So as the ATO says, it's your money, just not yet.
It's only your money when it lands into your bank account.
So those three structures, those three services goes to make up a super fund. Now, for many people, particularly people with small balances, they're going to buy all three of those from one entity. So think House Plus, Australian Retirement Trust. Aware. Who else has paid you money to be on the show?
Gosh. Aware have.
We should give them all a shout out.
Yeah, ART have sponsored this. We've done some work with UniSuper.
So all of those, bundle those three services up into one PDS effectively that you sign and your employer gives them the money. You can choose to unbundle those services. So a wrap account, for example, where the wrap or the trustee, the issue of the fund, so for BT Panorama, that's Asgard Super. For Macquarie, it's some sort of Macquarie Investment Management, but it's one of the 165 super fund or RSE, registrable superannuation entity.
Now, if you want further details on wrap accounts, if you've just stumbled over this episode, we'll put a link in the show notes and description on YouTube to the episode that we did a deep dive on wrap accounts.
Excellent.
So we don't have to recover that ground.
So if you do go to wrap, you're just buying from a different trustee. Many of those are brand names that you might not recognise because they don't spend $45 million a year marketing, but they are just as big. So of the top 10 funds, of the top 3 RSEs by assets, you'll find 3 of the top 10 are brands that you will just not recognise. And so in that model, you're often going to buy the portfolio management piece from your financial advisor, or in some cases yourself, and the underlying asset management will be quite often, all those big brands like Vanguard, BlackRock, whatever the fund managers you're familiar with. And in a wrap, the trustee, their role is about making sure the right products are available on the menu. But if you tell them that you want to invest in the Glen James active fund, as long as it's on the menu, they will follow your instructions. They'll often put guardrails around it, so no more than 20% in one fund.
Okay, and that's a really good example. So, for example, people say with insert Australian Super, Aware Super, ART, CBUS, or your super funds, why can't I buy Bitcoin with my super? Well, the trustee have a responsibility to manage your money for the benefit of you for retirement.
And they've got an obligation to act as a prudent trustee. So assuming they did buy Bitcoin as an example, and it disappears overnight, then they could be held liable to have made a stupid decision.
And I will say some of these other new entrants to the super world, such as Superhero, where they let you pseudo have your own vibe and choose your own investments, there is still a trustee behind the scene, and you'll find that maybe 40 to 60% has to go into a bread and butter diversified portfolio.
That's right. And that's why Choice Plus with House Plus, for example, says you must keep 20% in a standard, one of our standard options. You can put no more than 20% in a specific ETF.
Now, some people
and there's only a list of 29 ETFs you can invest in.
And they're not going to let you buy the 421st size company on the ASX.
Correct.
So
that's them exercising their prudent trustee responsibilities to protect you from yourself.
Yes. So that's kind of the lay of the land. So, and if we kind of swing back in and out of this question, most of the big super funds that you hear in terms of all the big ones, and even the ones that, particularly financial advisors who I hang out with, and you and the financial advisors that go to the FAAA conferences and all that.
Like even my financial advisor does that.
Yeah.
Which, heads up, is not me.
Is, most of the stuff that they recommend, they're going to be quote unquote safe.
Yeah.
From a fraud type thing.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Just talking about safe and super funds, there is a distinction between the regulation of a super fund and the regulation of a managed fund. So if you contrast money...
Or an MIS, which we can get into.
Or an MIS, yeah. So if you've got... so the distinction between buying Vanguard Super, as an example, and buying a Vanguard managed fund, Vanguard Super, the super fund trustee, and they're one of these 165 RSEs, they're regulated by APRA. And APRA stands for Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority, and the emphasis being on the P for prudential. So APRA cares what it's invested in. So they're looking at the security stability of the financial system, and they want to make sure that it's invested prudently. ASIC, which regulates managed funds, is not a prudential regulator. Their job is to make sure that Vanguard managed funds follow the rules, do what they say they're going to do in the PDS, and are appropriately licensed and audited and all those sort of things. So they're two very different roles for the regulator. And so a super fund is a much more strictly regulated entity than a managed fund. And self-managed super funds are not regulated by APRA. They're regulated by the tax office. Again, completely different. That's a pure compliance focus.
And, well, just on the self-managed super fund, effectively what you are doing is you are stepping in and doing what it says on the box, self-managing your money, and effectively you will be the trustee, or a company that you're a director of will be a trustee of that money.
And you will usually be buying managed funds rather than superannuation products.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and so in the kind of in the normal investment world, if we call it superannuation money, which is your big funds and the money goes into super, you might log in and be able to select, I want an ASX 200 investment option within my super fund. I can buy that same investment option in ordinary money in my own world, outside of super. But if I've got a self-managed super fund, that super fund can buy that thing that's ordinary money. Correct. And the minute that super fund buys it, it's considered in superannuation.
But it doesn't get the benefits of APRA regulation. It doesn't get the protection of what used to be the Superannuation Complaints Tribunal, and is now AFCA. And it's just regulated to a completely different standard.
Yeah.
So that's an important distinction. And certainly a lot of the stuff that we see where there is losses of money, it's not as a result of the behaviour of super fund trustees, which I guess we can come back to, because to my mind, I think there is only one super fund failure since, in the modern era, as they say in tennis, but since 1991 when the Superannuation Industry Supervision Act was brought in.
But that's not to be confused with individual product failures that can be purchased within super
and that's
environment.
Yeah, and that was sort of the point we'll get to at some point. And that was Trio or Astara, which fell over in 2009. I think it was 2009. Largely fraud related. The members of the super fund lost about $70-something million, which out of the $4 trillion of super assets is a really small sum of money. I'm sure every one of them felt every dollar of that, but in the scheme of things, that's a relatively small number. And all of them were made good through what was then the Superannuation Complaints Tribunal, and that was funded by a levy on every super fund. The people who did lose money were the people who'd invested in the underlying managed funds, mostly self-managed super funds.
Through ordinary money, quote unquote.
Yeah, and they don't get the coverage of that levy. So they lost, I think, about $100 million between them. And that was outright fraud. The trustee of the super fund arguably should have done more due diligence, which is easy to say in hindsight. It certainly didn't make the approved list of the investment fund I was running at the time.
Yeah. A question and more of a comment. People might be thinking, well, I've got my super with CBUS, ART, bloody Australian Super, Aware Super, all that stuff, REST. Well, what if REST goes under? And I think just in that trustee box the first kind of pillar, there's almost two entities. There's an entity that is the employer of all the people in the call centre who do the paperwork and manage the fund, but the actual wealth is in a separate entity, which is the trustee.
That's right. But you do raise a really interesting point when you come to member-owned funds, and this is something that gets lost in the run only to benefit members propaganda that a profit is payment for risk. So if you are in a mutual fund, which many of those larger names you just mentioned are, if the manager has a problem, like they overrun on a IT system development, which they have done in the past, or the money they spend on marketing doesn't bring in the new members they think it's going to do, or something from an operational perspective goes wrong, you as a shareholder in that company,
aka member of the fund.
By being a member of Host Plus, you are exposed to the operational activities of Host Plus, the manager. Now, that's not a huge risk.
But it's just a fact.
But it's a fact of life, and it's a consequence of mutual ownership. And if you're going to take that risk, you should be rewarded for it. And historically, you were generally rewarded through lower fees. That's less true today. And just so that I don't get accused of picking on big super funds. Vanguard is a mutual fund as well. So if you're invested in VTS or VEU as an Australian investor, you are partially investing in Vanguard, the manager. And so you are exposed to the operating risk of Vanguard. But the underlying assets of the fund, so the shares that are held in VTS, will be held by a trustee, and they're separate. But VTS as a fund, or the US fund in which it's invested, owns some of Vanguard. And it's got an obligation to top up any shortfalls in Vanguard. So it's a consequence of mutual ownership rather than it being super or non-super. So they're small risks.
It's a bug, not a feature, basically.
Yeah, it's a function of the structure that if you want to get the benefits of mutual ownership, which should be lower fees through lower profits to shareholders, it just means you're taking the risk that a shareholder would ordinarily take.
Okay, interesting. And it's a quick little side quest. You know how you get the mutual building society banks and like, oh, we're owned by members, so, you know, all that stuff. I rarely see that the rack rate interest rate that they charge their members extremely more competitive than a Big Four. Yeah.
And a part of that is because they can't raise money as cheaply, they can't borrow as cheaply, they've got lower credit ratings. There's a whole bunch of reasons for it. But it does feel really warm and fuzzy. Yeah. So we're used to mutuals being, you know, farmers markets or bookstores. I mean, I'm sure you would have bought a textbook from the Co-op bookstore in your time, Glenn.
No, but sure.
And so the appeal is that all profits go to members. So therefore your books should be cheaper. And it sort of didn't matter when the Co-op bookstores paid too much money for National Geographic and couldn't compete with Amazon because the books you'd already bought didn't know whether they were bought from there or not, and you could now decide where your next book is going to come from. But with a mutual insurance company or super fund, it does matter because when this risk comes home to roost, it's too late to do anything about it. So now that's not intended to put the fear of God into your listeners, but it's just a point that the really important point is there's a distinction between the trust which holds all of the assets, that's your money as a member, and the operating company. So a bankruptcy of whatever the trustee company that runs House Plus is called, would be largely sheltered from your underlying assets. So that's not a real problem.
Hey, it's Glenn here. Thank you so much for watching today's video. You made it to the end. Can I ask a favor? Can you hit that like button and maybe hit subscribe if you want to get notified when we release further videos just like this one, whether you watch the Money, Money, Money podcast or Retire Right. And remember, if you want to learn more about investing, I've got an investing book, The Quick Start Guide to Investing, and there's a link in the description to get your hands on a copy. Thank you so much. Bye.